We have quorum, so we'll call this meeting of the Airport Commission to order at 4:05 p.m. The first item on the agenda is the agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
And a second? Robin or Helen?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? I have just one modification to the agenda, that item 11.01 should really be in follow-up items and be 13.01. So we'll still talk about it, but it's just a technicality that not Helen presenting today, it is Helen asking for a follow-up on the airport sustainability plan. So that is the one modification I would propose to the agenda.
I had just one question of clarification on the agenda too. The last item 14, I know that we had discussed changing our dates to the first Wednesday of the month. Is that going to happen in December? Is that going to happen later on, or is that not going to happen?
So the current process is we meet on the third Wednesday of the month. Upon the ratification of the new rules and procedures, we're looking at moving that to the first Wednesday of the month. Although certainly if there are issues that we know are going to come before the council, we will sort of on a one-off basis move those to be the first Wednesday of the month.
And I'll just add that at the request of myself and the staff, that's what would be preferable so that we can meet other city deadlines, departments.
So I think about it specifically, does December 21 work, or would you prefer that be December 7?
I would prefer it to be December 7th.
Okay.
We have a couple meetings in December, I think 5 and 12, December 5th and 12th, or the 12th that we're trying to hit. So the 7th would be very good.
Great. So we'll shoot for the 7th then. Any other discussion on the agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor of adopting the agenda as amended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? You have an agenda. Item 3 is public forum. Eric. I can say anything. Look at all the normal crew. Is anyone on Zoom from the public today?
Town meeting.
So Donnie is town meeting. Okay.
Donnie is representative of BHP that will be giving a sustainability presentation.
Okay. Got it. So I'm used to seeing, they're under attendees. Got it. Thank you. All right, so we will close out public forum. Item 4 is the consent agenda. Do we hear a motion to approve the contents of the consent agenda?
So moved.
And a second. Thank you, Helen. Any discussion? Nick, any comments you want to make on?
Yeah, I mean, again, as I reiterate every month, we're not quite there yet with pre-COVID numbers, but we're almost there. Marie's going to present the financial report, and she's going to have a lot of great news on our revenues, as you've heard in the last couple of months. But as you can see, September over last year is fantastic, but our real benchmark is that 2019 number. Not there yet, but slowly gaining traction. If you've driven around our parking garage, you'll see that it's quite full, and certainly this weekend into next with the holiday travel, it's going to be busy.
Excellent. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of adopting the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Item 5, orientation on public right to know. Nick, would you like to introduce our guest speaker?
I would love to. Yeah, so I asked Pietro Lynn of Lynn and
Blackman and Minitsky.
Blackman and Minitsky to join us today to represent the airport. I'm hoping to retain Pietro and his firm for a couple of other things, but this is a great segue into an item that we've been talking about for some time at the commission level. And I've worked with Pietro and other boards that I'm involved with and really have learned quite a bit, specifically related to public right to know and open meeting laws. So Pietro Lynn.
Great. So do you have a, great. Good. Perfect. Okay, so look, I know that I don't have a lot of time. I do want to talk to you about the open meeting laws. What I do know is I did a little research on who you are, right? Like who is this airport commission and what do they do? And I don't think I need to tell you what you do, but it's interesting. You are clearly a public body. There are things that you do that are in a quasi-judicial capacity. There are things that you do as a deliberative body and as a legislative body. And that means that you are governed by the open meeting laws. And this is actually, let's talk a little bit about what the open meeting laws are and why it's important for you that you comply with those laws. So the open meeting laws are a series of statutes that govern public agencies. And they don't apply to labor negotiations. So if you are ever involved in labor negotiations as a board, there's a Vermont Supreme Court case that say that's different. That can never be subject to the open meeting laws. And so we don't need to worry about that as being part of your responsibilities. You know, all the things that you have to do, agendas, warnings, all of that does not apply to labor negotiations. And that may matter because you have a highly unionized workforce in the city and I think here at the airport. But other than that, if there is a quorum of you and you are together, that may be a public meeting and therefore governed by the open meeting laws. And the definition under the statute is on the screen. It's a gathering of a quorum of the members of a public body that we talked about for the purpose of discussing the business of the public body or to take action. And so what that really means is that if there is a quorum of you together, then and you begin to talk about things having to do with the work that the airport commission does, that is likely subject to the open meeting laws. And I get this question all the time, but can we send emails to each other? Or if we see each other at a party, can we sit down and talk about these issues that we confront when we're all together? And the answer is no. The answer is that if there is a quorum of you and you are communicating in any way about the business of that body, you are circumventing the open meeting laws if you have not warned it, if the public is not there, if there's not an opportunity for the public to participate. So we have to be incredibly disciplined in the way that we approach these issues. Meetings can occur by audio camera or other electronic means. I see today that we have at least 2 members who are attending via Zoom, and this is, the wonders of modern technology. It gives us an ability for people not to be actually in the room and still get a quorum. I remember back in the old days when my hair was not so gray, where that was not an option, and if people were sick or away, meetings would fail. This is a wonderful development, and I encourage boards to use it when they can. It does not apply, this open meeting law, the concept of warnings and public participation and all of that does not apply when you are acting in what is called a quasi-judicial capacity. We'll talk about what that means in a few minutes. Okay, so what I can tell you is that during COVID, there was a whole new set of emergency rules that were promulgated that sort of address the issue, which is we can't all be together, and we should not try to be together when there is this pandemic that we're all grappling with. I remember I represent the South Burlington School District, and there was a time where they were having a meeting, and the challenge was, how do we do a meeting and not have anybody present, including the public? And there really wasn't any way to deal with it because these rules apply, right? The board members can attend by electronic means, but they must identify themselves when the meeting is convened. So board members who did not identify themselves at the beginning of the meeting, you need to do that next time. And it's pro forma, but it's important for purposes of the record we're creating for, I forgot Helen, and there was someone else who was attending remotely. At the beginning of the meeting, you should say, I am this person, I am a member of the commission, and I am attending remotely. If the quorum is remote, the public must have a location where it can physically attend and participate in the meeting. And then at least one staff member of the commission or of the of the airport needs to be present at that location to facilitate. Those are the old rules. Those are not the COVID rules, but the COVID rules are over. We have moved back to the old rules of remote attendance. So what is a meeting, right? Like, so we've talked about, yes, there's this thing, the open meeting laws, and we know they occur when there is a meeting. So this is a meeting. When a quorum meets to consider governmental functions, including any matter over which the public body has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. We talked about that already a little bit. But what is not a meeting? There's some things specifically in the open meeting law that are exempted from being a meeting ever. And one of them was this training, right? Like, trainings are not meetings. It is not a meeting for you to have communications around scheduling, organizing agenda, distributing materials to discuss at a meeting. None of those things are a meeting. Not a meeting. Social gatherings, conventions, trainings, press conferences, so long as members do not discuss governmental business, right? So you can all come to a press conference together. Nick can get up and say, it's a great day at the airport, and here are all the great things that are happening. That's not a meeting. But what you can see is the scope of what is not a meeting is incredibly narrow and very specific. Most things, if you're talking about your business, are a meeting and require you to do certain things. We're not going to do my hypothetical. But this might be important, right? Like, board chair sends an email to all board members that looks like this. Dear member, I think the director is awful and should be fired. Here are the reasons why. He smells bad. The union hates him, right? Like, oh, I saw him drinking on the job. Let's discuss at a meeting. Right, this is not, I mean, this is crazy. Of course, we would never say this about Nick, but the purpose of the hypothetical is to get you thinking, can you send this out? Is this a violation of the open meeting law to have this kind of substantive discussion? And the answer is yes. Yes. What you can do as the chair is you can send out a new agenda that says, Nick's job performance, executive session item. We're going to talk about that. But what you can't do is that. And of course, the response, I got it. I had similar worries. Let's discuss at the meeting. No, right? Anything that is substantive that you communicate to a quorum is not permissible. Now, the corollary is also true. If you do not communicate it to a quorum, it's absolutely okay. So if it's just the two of you back and forth, not a problem. But you are not a quorum and you can say whatever you want and that's okay. Okay, next slide. So quasi-judicial, yes, please.
Is it okay to ask questions now?
Yeah, no, I want you to.
The scenario that you mentioned, I had a slightly different one. What if a group of commissioners realized that they would not have a quorum at the upcoming meeting and wanted to have a group email just to discuss when the next meeting is?
Great question. So you had me nervous until the end, right? It's the end itself. When can we have a meeting? As you remember, the earlier slide talked about scheduling. Scheduling is not a substantive discussion. Scheduling is specifically exempted from the open meeting law. So that's fine. So no problems there. When you start bleeding over into, and this is what I think of this agenda item, or this is an agenda item, and here's why I think it ought to be, then you start wandering into an area where perhaps you're having the kind of substantive discussions that require that they happen here under the bright lights with the public present and an ability for people to evaluate what you're doing. Now, so what I would say to you is this. There is a bias in the open meeting law, and that bias is that there is something magical about you having conversations in front of the public with an ability for the public to evaluate, for the dynamic that exists between all of you to be in the context of a warned meeting. And so two issues. One is you're all together when it happens, right? And it gets to happen under observation from the public. And the other part is the transparency around, the preview of coming attractions, that we issue warnings and agendas so that people can know in advance what are the interesting things that are going to happen here at this meeting, so I can know to come if it's something that interests me personally or from a business perspective. Those are the two. If you take nothing else from this presentation, Those are the things I want you to remember. Save it till the meeting if it's substantive, and make sure that the public has their opportunity to come, observe, participate on the issues that matter to them. Okay, so quasi-judicial capacities. Now, as I read the rules having to do with the airport commission, you are involved in grievances, right? And grievances require that you act in what is called a quasi-judicial capacity. This isn't you giving advice or making voting on action items or any of those things. This is you hearing evidence and argument from two sides, weighing what you have heard, and making a decision that affects the rights of one of the parties or both of the parties who have come before you. Where that is the case, you have engaged in this quasi-judicial capacity. And that is essentially what you see on this slide, is that there will be statutes that define whether you get to go into executive session for those judicial proceedings. And there are certain rules that govern what you do when you are in them. They have to be governed by principles of due process, and ultimately there must be some writing that results from those proceedings that explains why you are making the decision you have made around this adjudication of rights between the parties. Right, so here, these are the principles that I just talked about, right? The right to determination of fact and law, the right to an impartial finder of fact, the right to hear the evidence used to prove the allegations. These are all, it's a very formal process that comes before you when you are deciding grievances. Now, I would say this, what is very important for you as a board is not to get too far down into the weeds. Because the more you know about the issues that are coming before you when you're acting like a court, the less you have an ability to engage in that process. The courts require this concept of having impartial finders of fact. There is presumed bias if you go out and do your investigation before the issue comes before you, or if you sit down with one side or the other and say, hey, tell me about this issue. And so what it requires from the commission is that you withdraw, that you keep distance between you and the parties who are going to come before you, that you not know too much about those issues before they arise, and that you address them in a way that is fresh when they come before you and the people raise evidence and arguments. Okay, so how do we protect the public's right to attend? Right, remember, the public does have a right to come to these meetings, and they get to pick and choose the ones that matter to them. What we know is that your decisions, any action items, must be made in open session, except for these quasi-judicial determinations, right? We don't make any decisions in executive session. We can talk about things, but there are no votes in executive session. We must have an agenda, which has to be available before the meeting if it's requested, and the agenda should address with specificity what will be discussed or decided, and the commission should not act on items not on the agenda. So this agenda is an incredibly important document, and there's a slide later on that we'll use to talk about agenda. But that is your preview of coming attractions, right? That's your advertisement to the public. And the vaguer that document is, the less you have fulfilled your responsibility to provide the public with notice about what the issues are going to be. I am a firm proponent of a more detailed agenda so that people can pick and choose the items that matter to them. Meetings need to be warned if they're not regular meetings, and regular meetings are adopted as a resolution. You don't need to warn them. You have, what is it, the third Thursday of every month or something like that. I saw that in your rules. And so that's all you need to do unless you have a special meeting or an emergency meeting. And if you have those, they need to be warned in the due course. Yes. Yes.
So follow up, because we were considering changing the date.
Yes.
On our next meeting, which is only 3 weeks from now or so, in terms of the calendar. What's the general rule of thumb in terms of the length that a meeting needs to be warned on? Because we might have a difficult time adequately warning this next meeting.
Well, so for a special meeting, let's assume you're going to call it a special meeting because it's not your regularly scheduled meeting, 48 hours. That's all you need to do. And that's all that's required under the open meeting laws. If you're going to change when you do your regularly scheduled meetings, then that's something that requires a little more formality. And, you need to change your rules, obviously, that govern the procedures that govern the commission. And you need to notify the public through the normal channels, right? Like you post it on the bulletin board and send it to the newspaper and something like that. But the reality is that if it is a special meeting, not a lot of notice has to be given, 48 hours. If it's an emergency meeting, you don't have to give notice at all. You have the emergency meeting and you do your best to give notice in advance. I'll talk about it in a minute, but the difference between a special meeting and an emergency meeting is quite significant, right? The emergency meeting with little or no notice potentially is something that requires, like there's been a bomb found in the building and it blew up and you can't fly planes in and out of Burlington anymore. That's an emergency. An emergency is not, we've got a pressing matter. And there may be times where you'd all like to get together on really short notice, but I would suggest to you that that's really not a possibility, that 48 hours for almost anything that I can think of short of this catastrophe is something that requires 48 hours notice.
So in this scenario where we're contemplating moving the meeting, and I'm using that, I guess that word, I don't know if I'm using it right. We're thinking of having the meeting on the 7th instead of the 21st.
Yes.
So that would be a special meeting, but does the cancellation of the regular meeting, like,
Does it make it a regular meeting to cancel?
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? It's like, yeah. It's
So I would encourage this. I would give people notice that you're going to cancel the regular meeting, because that's, again, this is all about transparency and making sure that everybody knows what's going on. And at the same time, I would comply with a 48 hours notice. Now, I mean, if you already know what you're going to do,
Right.
then, the more notice, the better. I mean, and like you get good turnout here, right? People come and people are on the TV, and that's great. And so the more notice they get, the better off we are, right? And maybe you want to do more than just the minimum to let people know, because again, I've never seen a board get criticized for giving too much notice. I have seen boards get criticized for not giving enough. All right, so
Just for reference to Pietro, and I don't know if the commission knows this, we do post a physical agenda in various locations around the city. So we post at DPW, at the library, and at City Hall itself every single time. And that's inclusive of a special meeting or of course our regular meetings. We also include the cancellation of
Okay, so you
regular
post that
meeting
it's being canceled. Okay.
on top of all the digital formats that we have, websites and board docs.
which is fabulous, right? I mean, that's exactly how you want to do it. Okay, so who gets to say what? This is this is for these folks back here. This is an important part of what we all do. You have this thing called public comment period. I think you called it something else. I've forgotten the name that you used for it.
Public forum.
Yeah, so the principle is simply this, that people get to come and get to talk at these meetings if they want to. And so I don't know that it's ever going to get out of control at an airport commission meeting, but there are public agencies where things get quite emotional, where people have very strong feelings about the issues, and they, it can be disruptive, or they're very committed to saying what they want. And the challenge is to know, what is the extent to which people get to say and do things? What are the limits? How do we make sure the limits are enforced in a way that's fair? What I would say is that there are reasons that the chair, you can establish reasonable rules. It doesn't require a vote of the entire commission, just the chair. And the chair can inform people in advance what those rules are going to be. And I strongly encourage it, right? I mean, we all, as human beings, react better when we know what the rules are in advance, not when they're imposed on us mid-speech. So what are the rules? What we know is this from the statutes, from the open meeting laws, they can't be based on what we say, right? So if somebody wants to come in here, and my friend Matt, who I just met tonight, comes in here and he wants to talk about the Red Sox, we can all roll our eyes and say, Matt, dude, that's got nothing to do with why we're here, but we can't stop him. Matt's entitled to say whatever he wants. If he thinks it's important that you as a commission are aware of the Red Sox record, yeah, so be it. That's Matt's right. But we can limit the amount of time. We can require civility and restrict the use of profanity. We can limit repetition. And we must be careful when we do this, when we fashion these rules, to make sure they're applied in a neutral fashion, right? What we can't do is let Matt, who we like, go on forever and talk, and use bad words or whatever, and with a person we don't like, restrict them in ways that are different than what we did with Matt. And what I always encourage commissions, boards, agencies to do is to use the rules and apply them in the same neutral way to every person, no matter what, every time. Again, here are some rules that you made, and you didn't do it, and nobody even wanted to say anything. So maybe I'm sort of barking into the dark here, but what I always tell boards is you never know. And what you don't do is dust off some rules when you need it. What you do is you have the rules always, and then you can't be accused of trying to restrict speech, right? Because that's important, right? This is about free speech rights and rights guaranteed to Vermonters under the open meeting law. So if you're going to have rules fashioned by the chair, then let's have those rules always, and let's make sure that you announce those rules always. And here are some rules that work.
Can I just have a quick question on that?
Yeah, please.
So we very rarely have a large number of members of the public at this meeting. So we don't have, like, bullet one, we don't have a limit. If there were 30 people who showed up,
yes,
I would say before we started public forum that we would be limiting to 3 minutes or whatever length of time. Is that an issue that it's not consistent between meetings? Because it would be consistent within the meeting for everyone who's present that day, but it's not consistent from meeting to meeting.
So let me respond in this way, because there's not a simple answer to that. It's a great question. Look, what is a reasonable restriction on speech depends on the number of people who want to talk. So for example, years ago, I was at a meeting where there were 100 people who showed up and they all wanted to talk. So the board chair said, you each have 30 seconds, right? And that was reasonable under those circumstances. However, what I would say to you is that I think it's important, what I wouldn't want is for people to say, yeah, we're all here, all 30 of us, because we feel strongly on this issue, and the reason you're restricting us is you want to shut us down. And I think it's important to have rules around the duration of public comment for everybody at all times, and you can increase or decrease those rules given the volume of people, the number of people who want to talk. That's what I would say.
So it's better to have a consistent rule and relax it if necessary.
Well, I wouldn't relax it. I would restrict it, right? Like I would not go up, because think about it. How many people who come to public comment, right? This is not somebody talking on an agenda item. This is somebody just coming to your meeting to talk. How many people really have something to say that is not repetitious, that goes beyond 3 minutes? Not a lot. I mean, my experience is 3 minutes is generally enough time for somebody to say, you've been dealing with this issue, and I think you need to understand, I feel badly about this issue, and I want you to do the following thing. That was 20 seconds, right? So I encourage, and maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's 20 minutes, but I just encourage a limited amount of time. That is the general rule. And then if you have a gazillion people who want to talk, then maybe you ratchet that down to accommodate more people so you can actually get to your meeting. So those are the rules that I think you should announce in advance. We're not going to do that.
Before you go on, can I ask a question? Sorry.
Of course.
Ahead from the side here. This is Robin. Just wondering, it seems like sometimes people really show up because they want to get questions answered. And given the rules, it says, there is no onus on us to answer questions.
Yes.
But is there
So let me
Or that we
respond to
are
that, Rob.
required to ask and answer questions.
Yeah. No, I get where you're coming from. So this is what I would say. Public comment, as contemplated by the open meeting laws, is just that, comment, right? And your job is to listen respectfully and to take in that information and do what you think is the right thing to do. There is no obligation to answer questions. And oftentimes, what happens when you start answering questions is that it prolongs, it creates this new process, it gets you into items that are not on the agenda. And I would suggest to you that if there's something that's pressing, it needs to get on the agenda, because it's not fair to the rest of the public who may be deeply committed to those issues for all of a sudden the board to engage in what looks like an agenda item on the spur of the moment because somebody asked a question. You know, like if somebody comes in and says, this is a really important issue, and by the way, I'd like it to be on the agenda, that's perfectly legit. And that's something that we ought to consider. But if once we start getting into a back and forth about an issue, what we're really doing is we're engaging in something that looks an awful lot like what we would do if it were on the agenda, but without that preview of coming attraction, so the rest of the public can know that that's what we're going to do. Does that make sense, Robin?
Yes, and so then the follow-up to that would be one of the things that of attending lots of boards around Burlington in public comment is there is rarely someone that actually makes that statement. This is public comment. We are here to hear you, but not to answer direct questions that would have to be on agenda items. Is it worth making that statement at the beginning of public comment of what is public comment for those that don't understand?
So Robin, I am so with you on that. I think it's incredibly important so that people don't think you're being rude. You're not. And I think it's absolutely reasonable to explain why, so that people understand that this isn't just us refusing to answer questions. This is us respecting everybody else's right to be involved if we get into this kind of thing. And so, you know, look, again, if it's important enough, the chair can get it on the agenda, the board can vote it onto the agenda, and it can become a full-blown issue, and you can explore it in a way that satisfies everybody.
Right.
So question on that point, because I see your second bullet there, it says the agenda may be modified at the beginning of a meeting.
Yes.
By the time we get to public forum, the meeting has already started.
Correct.
So can it be modified to?
No. Right. So
then we can't make it an agenda.
But you can, right?
Okay.
You can say next time around,
Okay.
right? Because remember, we want to advertise it, right? We want people to know it's going on the agenda. So we advertise it, we warn it, we put it on the bulletin boards and wherever else Nick said they put these things, and we give people the opportunity to come to the meeting and not just this one person who wants questions answered.
Right. So to be clear, we can't, if it's not on the agenda at the or modified at the onset of the meeting, if something comes up in public forum, we actually can't engage in a discussion.
You should not.
Because,
I mean, look, so what I will always say to you is there are no open meeting law police, right? Nobody comes in and throws on the handcuffs and says, you know, you're busted because you violated the open meeting law. But really, if we're going to serve the public the way we're supposed to, the answer is no, we don't do that. And we don't do that not because we're rude, but because we have an obligation not just to the individual, but to the community as a whole. Okay, so like the agenda, right? So the agenda is this is a critical document that you've created, and the chair does it. I mean, like, what incredible power. The chair is responsible for deciding what the agenda is, right? You get to decide who gets to talk about what. And so that is the power of the chair. There can be conversations with the chair in advance of the agenda saying, hey, what about this and what about that? And that's all acceptable. But ultimately, the chair decides, except when you show up at the meeting, and at the meeting, a majority of the board can vote on motion to amend the agenda, right? But it requires a motion, right? If you want to change the agenda, it is I move to change the agenda by doing this thing. And then you need a second. And then the question is, do we vote on, is there a majority that votes yes? And if so, then it finds its way onto the agenda. I strongly discourage that. for all the reasons I talked about before, because this is a sneaky way of not letting the public know what you're going to be talking about, right? It is far better to defer it to a later meeting, get it on the agenda, have it warned, give people that opportunity to show up and shake their fists at you if they want to. Okay. And again, the other item is this one here, right? We want agenda items to be specific. We want it to be a description where everybody understands what you're talking about so that they have an ability to choose whether they want to attend. Yeah, so the board wishes to discuss the aviation director's performance. The agenda indicates that the executive session will be regarding a confidential personnel matter. Is that enough? And the answer is no, right? Like, we need something more specific. So for example, when we're talking about executive session items, we want to have the public to have an ability to know with specificity what's going on so that they can challenge it if they think it's inappropriate for you to be going into executive session to talk about that. Now, how would we discuss that? Like, whether Nick is doing a good job or not? We wouldn't say whether Nick is doing a good job or not, but what we might say is evaluation of administrator's performance, right? We're not identifying Nick, but we're making clear that this really is a personnel matter which might be subject to executive session rules and get us out of public session. Okay. So this is the kind of thing that I think is super important, right? This might be what we do with an agenda. It's longer than what you're doing now, and again, just descriptive, right? Duration of the time that will. This is what's in the statute, by the way. The duration of the time that will be dedicated to the item, the date, the time, and location of the meeting. Adjustments to agenda. What must be on the agenda if you're going to adjust the agenda, and good description so that people know what's going on. Minutes, right? So we talked about previews of coming attractions, the agenda, and now this minutes. What did we actually do? And this is for people who were not here. And I would say this: minutes are an overlooked and undervalued piece of what you do. It is really the only official record of what you have done here in your work for the public. And so we need to pay close attention to the minutes that we create. And there are a lot of places where minutes are sort of an afterthought. And I just urge people to reevaluate that approach. They're required for all meetings. They must cover topics and motions that arise at the meetings and give a true indication of the business of the meeting. That's from the statute. Mandatory information includes who's there, all active participants, right? Everybody who participated, motions, proposals, and resolutions, and what was done by the board. The result of any vote with a record of individual votes if roll call is taking voice votes, there's no requirement, just that it pass. And proposals, I don't know what a proposal is, but it's in the statute. Executive session, I'm sorry, Nick, I'm going long. I apologize.
It's the board's meeting.
All right,
the chair's meeting.
I'm sorry, board, I'm going a little bit long, but let me talk to you about executive session and then I'll wrap it up because I know you've got other important business to do.
Are we going to have a copy of this?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, absolutely. So executive session is this exception to transparency. Like it's doing things in secret. And I always encourage boards to do it as little as possible and then to make sure you have really good reasons when you do. The concept here is that there's some things that are, that as a matter of course should be kept secret, and we'll talk about those. And then there are other things that, depending on what they are, may be secret. These are the two categories, right? Let's move to the first. These are the maybe. Maybe they ought to be an executive session. And the test in terms of whether they go into executive session or not is this specific finding that premature general public knowledge would clearly place the public body or somebody else, some other person, at a substantial disadvantage. Okay, so I'll breathe deeply for a moment. And so what am I talking about? Well, there's something, these are all items where you go, yeah, I can see where that might put us at a disadvantage. So let's start with contracts. If Nick's negotiating with United Airlines, and wants to talk about it and wants to talk about, his negotiating positions and where he'll go and where he won't, clearly disadvantage to us if we do that in public, right? Because the United people are sitting on the side and go, oh, that's good to know. We don't want that. So that's easy, right? And all it requires is that when you vote to go into executive session, you say there are two parts, and you can do it all at once, or you can do it in two separate votes. Specific finding of disadvantage, and that it's about contracts, right? And this extends to labor relations agreements, arbitrations, mediations, grievances, pending civil litigation, or attorney-client communications, all of those things. Now here I am at a public meeting, I'm doing a training, but I'm giving you advice. Now somebody has decided that, it's okay for me to give you this advice in public. But there may be times where getting advice from a lawyer, you want it in private, and that's what this statute says. So those are the list of things where probably, you get to do it in executive session, but only after really thinking about whether there's a disadvantage. And then there are those things which are the things where you always get to. Doesn't matter, advantage, disadvantage, doesn't matter. Here's a list of things that might get you into executive session. Buying real estate, hiring, firing, evaluating employees, disciplinary actions. This would matter, right? Like security issues, right? If we're going to talk about things where there's a peril to public safety, right? Like what are our security plans for the airport? We don't want just everybody to know about it. Those are the kinds of things that get you into executive session. And then there's some records, if you're going to talk about those records, things that are exempt from the Public Records Act, those all go in, can support executive session. Okay, executive session rules, all you need to know is this, right? Don't take notes. You can if you want to, but you probably shouldn't. All it takes is a majority for you to go into executive session, and you can't do anything there other than talk. If you're ever going to do anything, you have to come out and vote in public. Now, so let me. Should I talk to them, Nick, about a conflict of interest? Yeah. So look, a conflict of interest those are terms that are thrown around a lot, and it's a very specific thing. And this is what I would say. I borrow this from the Vermont School Boards Association because I've always felt like it's the best definition I've run into. It means that a board member's private interests, as distinguished from their own personal interests, so they're from the public interest, would benefit or be harmed from their actions as a board member. So the way to think about this is, like if this is something specific to you and there's some advantage, some disadvantage that flows from the decision. If a relative is involved, or if there's financial gain that will come to you or someone you love, these are things you should not be involved in. These are areas where there really is a conflict of interest. If you have strong feelings about something, that's not a conflict of interest. Like if you've been, sort of delayed by the airlines 20 times in the last 50 days, and like you feel very strongly about some rule that will deal with it, that's absolutely okay. And that's not a conflict of interest. There's this other thing called an appearance of a conflict of interest. And you know what an appearance of a conflict of interest is? It's not a conflict of interest. It's something else, right? We talked about what a conflict of interest is. This is something where somebody is saying to you, hey, that doesn't look and smell right. Or you look at it and you say, yeah, I don't have a conflict as we just talked about it, but maybe I need to disclose it because somebody looking at this might think I did. And what you should do when that happens is, A, get it out on the table, right? Talk about it, right? Describe what the issue is, explain why it's not a conflict, or acknowledge the conflict if it is, and then withdraw. And when you have a conflict, it doesn't mean that you get to sit and talk about it and not vote. It means get out of the room. Right, like this is not your thing, right? You've already decided that you've got a conflict, and your facial expressions or your body language or whatever it is may impact the conversation. And so, what I always tell members of boards or agencies who are involved in open meeting laws issues is get out, just leave the room until that issue is over. That's the safest, best, most integrity filled way of doing things. And then no one can later say or claim that you were, engaging in some form of nonverbal communication to get your way. Nobody can say that, you didn't leave and therefore your presence altered the outcome. Okay. Confidentiality, you probably know about that. Let me just quickly talk about this issue and then I'll wrap up. Look, it's not just open meeting laws that governs the public's right to know what you're up to. It's also the Public Records Act. And believe it or not, almost everything you create, every document, every note you create in connection with this work is a public record. And the public will be almost always entitled to see those documents if they make a request of the commission or the city. And so our job is to make sure that those documents are available. And so what we know is this, any emails, text messages, notes that you create, they all have to be preserved. They're public records now because they were created in the context of the work you were doing for the city of Burlington and the Airport Commission. There are some things that are exempt, but let me give you my tips. What's important is always use the city or the airport email system. Don't use your personal system. And you may ask why? Because we don't want to have to go pawing around through your personal emails to find city documents. Keep it separate, make it easy, have it all on the server. And as to your notes, don't take them home and destroy them. You're probably going to have to give them up to Nick, and they probably have to be preserved in some fashion because they are public records once they're created. Executive session notes don't need to be produced, but they too are public records and have to be preserved. So I guess what I'm saying to you, and I'll wrap it up here because I've gone well beyond my 20 minutes. I apologize for that. And there's much more we could talk about if we had more time. Look, this can be onerous. I get it. But in the end, if we're just very disciplined about how we go about running our meetings, how we communicate, what we, on what media we communicate with, this is all very doable. Questions, concerns, criticisms, I'm all ears.
Did we touch on, or did Pietro touch on everything that?
Yeah, I have a couple
You
specific
think-
questions, but I want to let other commissioners go if they have.
And we'll send out the presentation after this too, which has even more information.
Yeah,
That's
and
super
Robert's
helpful.
Rules of Order, we didn't even get it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you are governed by Robert's Rules of Order. So let me say this, this is a very informal group. Guess what? I have not seen Robert's Rules of Order used here, right? Like, it's very specific. And again, nobody's going to come and put you in jail for not enforcing Robert's Rules of Order, but it contemplates that we're going to do things in a certain way. People have to be recognized before they get to speak, right? I mean, we've got to make sure that people speak only on agenda-related items. And all of that is sort of the responsibility of the chair. So when you took that on, you didn't realize all the things you were going to have to do. And I would just encourage that level of formality. And it's hard because these are small groups and people become familiar with each other. But the reality is we really do need to make this incredibly formal. That's what your rules say.
Speaking of formalities, you mentioned that we should use our city or government, our non-personal email.
Correct.
And I thought I remember early on Hannah talked about that, or we would have access to that because I've been using just my personal one. And
You do have a city email account, and we'll make sure we're connecting you to the right login.
Right. And again, this is, it's not a violation of the open meeting laws for you to do that, or even the Public Records Act. But what it means is if somebody wants to see your communications, it may include looking through your emails, and that's not comfortable. Any other questions?
Helen or Robin, do you have any questions?
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Helen and Robin, I'm not looking at you, but I can't see you, so I'm
That's
naturally looking at the people who are here.
That's okay. I would turn on the the host hasn't enabled the video, so it's not available to undo. But so you covered sort of, if you are worried that you have a conflict of interest, then you can you can just be transparent. Is this a conflict of interest? But it sort of leads one to wonder, okay, we get the agenda, we look at the agenda and we go, oh, that might be a conflict of interest. And instead of, maybe waiting until you get to the next meeting, is it appropriate to reach out to the chair or someone else prior to that meeting and say, does this sound like a conflict to you?
So look, what I would say is this, that the more you announce your conflict or explore your conflict, the better off you are. And it really is, it's a question of transparency around your particular situation. So, if you're asking, oh, I see something on the agenda, it looks funky, totally, hi, Rob. So totally appropriate for you to be in touch with the chair and say, hey, what is this agenda item? Because I may have a conflict, and explore that issue. And then when you get to the meeting, say, I do have a conflict and here's what it is. And for that reason, I'm going to get up and, go down and get a smoothie or whatever it is you're going to do, and come get me when it's over.
Yeah, it just seems more, potentially more efficient.
Yeah, no, and there's nothing to prevent you from doing it. And look, efficiency matters. I think it's an awesome idea.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. My only comment is that was an excellent presentation. I think you
That's really
did all.
Oh, thank you. That's great.
I'm quite familiar with it, but it was good.
Chair of the South Burlington.
Yeah, well, of course it is.
So my only question I had, and again, I echo Helen's, was really helpful. Get some things I got to start reading about, I guess. But as you saw before this meeting, we were wondering if for a moment we would have quorum for this meeting today. We have had it happen where, because of technology, in the middle of the meeting, you suddenly lose quorum. And so I'm just curious what the rules are around that.
You can't meet without a quorum, right? And so if you lose a quorum because somebody's connectivity goes away, I'd wait till they come back before you do anything else.
Okay. And so the way and then sort of the follow-up to that is the way we structure our agenda, we try to put the action items towards the front so we can get them done. And then we have a lot of reporting that happens on the back end. So financial reporting, updates on construction. Are those updates permissible if we do not have quorum?
So the short answer is no, right? Because you are not supposed to do anything, even take in information in a meeting without a quorum present, right? The quorum is what creates the meeting. And so if you lose your quorum, you should not be doing anything. And I know it sounds silly and formalistic, and maybe it's both, but there is this, the underlying bias, the underlying tenet is that there is a magic of having a quorum present that makes this better, and that you should not have any meetings, any actions as a board, even listening in the context of a meeting without that quorum.
Anything else, commissioners, staff, questions?
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
Thank you very
that's
much.
great.
We appreciate you.
And I'm very sorry I went too long.
That's okay.
Thank you.
It's all good. It's all good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Take care. Bye, everybody.
All right, so that wraps up item 5. We move on to item 6, which is the sustainability implementation plan. Nick, is that yours?
Well, it's mine, the team's, and I'm gonna introduce another speaker tonight. So Donnie is with us from VHB. If you remember, we signed a contract with VHB about a year ago to start inventorying and undertaking our sustainability plan. We're not there yet to present the actual findings. We're still gathering an extensive amount of information. And Donnie and his team are able to help us with that, because it is truly extensive, the amount of information we're gathering. We've heard some feedback, not only from Helen and the South Burlington City Council and the staff of South Burlington, as well as the folks in Burlington and the City Council of Burlington, to make sure that we're including aircraft carbon emissions, which we are also doing in our inventory process. I am happy to report, actually, Larry and I just returned last night at about 11 p.m. From Chicago. Him and I were at a what's called an Airports Going Green conference. It's a worldwide conference. We had folks from New Zealand, Puerto Rico, all sorts of Bogota, and of course all over the country at some of the major airports that Larry and I were able to participate in, specifically regarding, of course, airports and what they're doing for their sustainability and their climate action plans. Not just related to aircraft, but related to buildings, how to incorporate some really sustainable efforts in that food waste, solid waste, water conservation, diversion of some of the waste. So there's an extensive amount of information that we brought home. I haven't been able to catch up with the team just yet, but also an extensive amount of action items that I'm excited to start sharing. Slightly off from where we are with the sustainability plan, but Donnie, I've asked to come here to kind of present again what the scope of work that Donnie and his team are pursuing, as well as a status update from there. So if you're all right with it,
Absolutely.
Donnie, take it away.
Thank you, Donnie.
Sure. And Nick, did you see my colleagues, Carol and Katie Shannon over there at Airports Going Green?
I knew Carol was there. I wasn't sure. There's a couple hundred people, but I thought that was her. She was wearing masks.
I think, she's always wearing masks. I think she was there just for the one day. So greetings.
You might have to come up.
Yep.
We can talk about that later. Yeah.
Okay. So we're good to start, Larry?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead, Donnie.
So greetings, Donnie Gorskolb with VHB. I'm based in and around Boston area, but I'm working across the country, actually, in New England mostly, but I've worked on other airports outside of the New England region, currently working on Tucson as well, but worked at Salt Lake City and other airports as well, including San Francisco. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the BTV Sustainability Management Plan, giving you an update. I know that you guys have taken a look at our scope of work prior to tonight, but like Nick said, I want to give you just a brief overview of that. What we're going to be doing. We're building off of the 2019 highlights report, so the sustainability brochure that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. We produced that as part of the master plan update some years ago. That brochure includes a wealth of information, but very little analysis on, where BTV's performance is, particularly with it, in itself compared to its trends, but compared to and benchmarked against other airports within the region and outside the region. What we're doing here today, again, is building off of that brochure, but developing some baseline studies. So the baseline studies include energy and greenhouse gas emissions, waste management, ground transportation, water resources, and passenger experience. I highlighted the energy and greenhouse gas emissions baseline study on this slide because I have a couple of other slides that I want to showcase here. Focus on the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, which is our current focus as part of this project. Now, the actual inclusions of these different topic areas and how they're assessed and how they're looked at is yet to come. I mean, there's multiple topics that could be assessed as part of waste management, as part of ground transportation, water resources, et cetera. But we want to make sure that we're going to be addressing and talking about the topics that are most relevant to BTV and areas where you can have the most impact. And the greenhouse gas emissions inventory is going to, traverse all of these different topics, but it will provide the information necessary to determine, where those areas are that you may want to, send your and make your investments. Once we go through and develop the baseline studies, we want to work with you to develop the sustainability policy and a set of goals. Stemming from those goals, identifying and evaluating strategies, developing phasing for those strategies, developing a program and performance monitoring framework that you can take with you. So we'll have some baseline numbers as part of the baseline studies. We'll measure those against the goals and the strategies and the targets that we identify. And through performance monitoring and a progress program, you'll be able to say, okay, well, we've made X amount of progress since our baseline back in 2022, 2023. Prepare the sustainability management plan, just wrapping it all together. And general assistance services, we're providing sort of on-call support to Nick and Larry, Shelby as well, in terms of anything that really pops up from a sustainability perspective, whether it's reviewing a grant, looking at some solar siting, really being the go-to resource for sustainability at the airport, and happy to do so. And anything that we learn through those endeavors gets built into the sustainability management plan. You have a lot going on at the airport. So this is an opportune time to develop this sustainability program and understand where your emissions are and where your impact is overall from a sustainability standpoint. So the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, the last one that was produced was 2010, and it's my understanding that it was produced by the city of Burlington, and it didn't emanate from the airport itself. There was very limited information within that climate action plan from the city, and from what I gather, it was about circa 2012, so about a decade old now. And then the baseline that was used for the airport was 2010. So it is quite old, and what we're going to be doing is updating that inventory, but using a process and a program that is more specific to the airport. There are certain protocols and guidance documents that are specific to airports that we will be following, and I'll get into that in just a second. But first, we're going to be using a 2019 baseline. So we went back and forth with the BTV team, and it's our understanding that really you haven't completely recovered from COVID. So using a pre-COVID number is likely the best scenario that we could utilize to estimate what your real emissions might be. So we're going to be using the 2019, but the idea is that emissions inventory should be updated at least every 5 years, if not every year. And obviously from a 2010 to a 2012 to a now 2022, 2023, that's a big gap. So we want to start closing that gap moving forward. What is the purpose? Really, we want to identify the sources, and I have a table on the next slide that helps you identify what sources of emissions are at the airport, and of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions, emanating from airport activities. And we want to quantify those emissions, whether they're airport controlled or tenant controlled or public controlled. There are certain sources that are being generated, that are generating, and that may not necessarily be the airport itself. Compare the 2019 emissions to the 2010 baseline and observe trends. So you've done quite a bit of work from an energy efficiency standpoint between 2010 and today. You've installed solar panels, you've upgraded building equipment, you've done some lighting retrofits, and we want to make sure that we're taking credit for that and normalizing that against the growth that the airport has seen over that decade. Now, I say as possible here because I don't have the background data on how that airport emissions inventory was done in 2010, but it'll give you a good sense of the trends that are and how you're trending. And then use the information, like I implied earlier, to identify and evaluate the impact of policies and programs aimed at reducing those emissions. So where are your biggest where is your biggest bang for the buck, and what projects are really going to make the most impact at the lowest cost and at the lowest or greatest ease of implementation? So that's what we're really looking for. We're looking for the sweet spot of where are your emissions, what is the level of implementation for a strategy? Is it high? Is it low? What kind of partners do you need to get it done? Do you need to have a conversation with BED for additional solar generating capacity? But the sweet spot, what I'm referring to, is ease of implementation, cost, and GHG reduction potential. So just to give a little bit of background, scopes and sources. So the GHG emissions inventory is going to be clearly denoting the scopes, which are scopes 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 is direct emissions, basically anything that you as the airport operator are associated with. So the fuels that are burning in your stationary equipment, in your fleet equipment, in your general maintenance equipment. Scope 2 is the emissions that are generated and through and via your electricity purchases. And scope 3 is everything else that's indirect and optional to report because they're owned by the tenants, owned by the public, and owned by employee commuting back and forth to the airport. And you can see here in the table to the right-hand side, this is direct from the guidance document from the ACRP. Owning, controlling entity, the airport operator, which would be you, tenants, for example, Heritage and Beta, and the public, of course. Sources, generally speaking, from your perspective, not necessarily the aircraft operations, but you might want to consider taking, the emissions that are tied to the aircraft when they're plugging in. Well, that would be scope 2. I'm misspeaking there. But there's, APU usage, GSE usage, stationary sources, fire training that's happening at the VTANG, construction, waste recycling, there are a number of different sources that are controlled by you, but may not necessarily, or that may not necessarily fall within the scope. So it gets a little complicated when it breaks out between the scopes and the sources, but basically these are the sources that we're going to be looking at as part of the inventory. And the one thing that I did want to point out is when I talked to Nick about, and what Nick is it okay that I talk about the airport carbon accreditation?
Wait, yeah, please. I think that's great.
Okay, all right. We haven't confirmed anything just yet, but the airport carbon accreditation is something from ACI. It is a global carbon management certification program for airports. Basically, airports produce their greenhouse gas emissions inventories in a manner that is consistent with the program. They submit it for verification. There's a verification process where they look at your numbers, they ask you questions, they make sure that we're covering everything that we need to cover as part of the inventory, and that we send it and submit it, and they give you a certain level of accreditation once everything is verified and everything is okay. There's about 6 levels, or there is 6 levels rather. There's the mapping, which is the first level. Basically, that's what we would be doing. We're just doing the inventory, we're just getting going started. There's the reduction, and the reduction is level 2, making sure that you have your inventory, you've mapped it, but then you've also compared it through to a previous 3-year average to demonstrate that you've reduced your emissions over the course of that or between those different inventories. Optimization is you're moving forward and producing even more efficiencies in line with a carbon reduction plan that goes along with your reduction level 2 accreditation. Neutrality, you're offsetting everything that you can no longer reduce from an efficiency standpoint. Transformation, you're really making some impact within the larger industry. And transition, you're really moving beyond even more the transformation stage and really taking your carbon accreditation to the highest levels. And what we're going to be doing is using the airport carbon and emissions reporting tool for this particular project. It's nicknamed ACERT. It is a self-contained Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. It basically outlines all of the different sources, all of the different, across all of the different scopes. We input the data, and Nick mentioned that we're in the process of collecting a lot of data. This data pertains to the utilities, your electricity consumption, your natural gas consumption, your refrigerant usage, your fleet inventory, all of these different things that maybe you weren't thinking about, documenting or gathering. But if we're doing it today and you're thinking about moving forward with the airport carbon accreditation and advancing across all of the different levels, like many airports have done, within North America and globally, you might want to develop a process for gathering this data in an efficient manner from year to year or from 5 years within every 5-year period. So this Acer tool is basically the bones of the application for the airport carbon accreditation. We submit it, it goes through that verification process. But the tool itself is going to output your scope 1 emissions, your scope 2 emissions, and your scope 3 emissions. And I would like to open it up to any questions at this point.
I'll just add a.
So
couple more
I
things.
just noticed that Robin has dropped off.
Oh, no. So we don't have a quorum?
How prescient was that earlier conversation?
Quite relevant.
Oh, dear.
Donnie, can I ask you a question as we try to figure out our quorum? I'm sure that you are aware that the airport is growing. And what I heard you say is to try to get some base level information so that we can get a trajectory going and determine that we're moving in the right direction. How, I mean, there must be some sort of factor in terms of how you grow, but also maintain a certain degree of sustainability? Or is that just a lost cause that can't be factored in?
Well, it's factored in. Are you talking about this in the general sustainability management plan sense or the ACA carbon accreditation sense, or both?
I guess both. I'm just,
Okay.
again, what I really heard you talking about was the idea of we want to compare things where we were in the past and that we should be doing this every 5 years. And I'm just wondering, it looks like we're going to have a difficult time maintaining sustainability as we grow, simply because we're growing. And sort of like, is this sort of like the problem of a developing nation? How do you develop but maintain sustainability?
Right. So I'll answer that in 2 ways. One is that we, within the reporting and the baseline studies, will provide some normalizing factors. So we'll do energy per passenger employment, for example. Or the energy use intensity is going to be automatically normalized by the square footage of your facilities. That's one way that we capture that growth, is that if there's a growth in employments or square footage, it's sort of baked into some of the reporting. I mean, we'll also report on the absolute values, but we'll report them in a manner that is showcasing what it means compared to your levels of growth. But I will also add that many airports and many entities are looking beyond just setting targets to reduce energy consumption by 20%, 30% on a project by project basis, or airport wide. They're really looking at driving toward net zero or carbon neutrality. And that really doesn't make too much of a difference when it comes to how the airport is growing, because it is an absolute reduction, a zero end game. So when you're looking at new construction, when you're looking at your operations and your purchasing and your procurement, thinking about it from a net zero perspective and a carbon neutral perspective. So if you're going to be purchasing, let's say you need let's take, for example, you need an extra snow melter because it's probably a bad example, but you need an extra piece of equipment because your employments are going up or the number of aircraft operations are going up. You have a choice between, a natural gas fired version of that or an electrified version of that. That electrified version is going to have an opportunity to help you reach net zero, regardless of whether or not you're adding that, because you're going to be hopefully supplementing that with renewable sources of energy at some point. So I'm getting into a little bit too much detail for your question, but I think from a growth perspective, that's one thing that you want to consider, is that many airports and many organizations are looking at net zero and carbon neutrality and making their decisions today to enable that that target achievement regardless of how they're going to be growing. But today, for the sustainability management plan, we're incorporating those normalizing factors such as energy use per square foot or energy per use per passenger, those types of things that will account or capture that growth rate.
And I think it's important to know from the direction of the airport that the inventory, the sustainability plan, the baseline that we're performing today, even looking at the past, looking at the baseline today, and then adjusting it as we move into the future is critical. Concurrently with some of the growth that we're seeing, whether we're talking about new solar panels or new windmill, working with our tenants like Heritage Aviation on providing the next generation of fuel systems like sustainable aviation fuel. But beyond that too, our concessionaires, where does their food waste go? Where does their garbage go? How much goes to the landfill versus actually getting recycled or reused? So that's really important. But as we grow, it's like Donnie said, as we grow physically in size as well, we need to make sure that we're kind of thinking outside the box a little bit here. We've learned so many different things, and we know of so many different things, whether we're talking about alternative ways to build a terminal apron to sustainable ways of building a new building that contributes to our future inventory and our net neutrality as we move forward. And that's 100% going to be the goal of this process and a policy of this airport moving forward.
And one thing I want to note is that the airport is somewhat of an island, but it isn't an island. It operates within the larger community, so there's a community aspect to this as well. So the community is in two respects that I can think of off the top of my head. One is they're going to be interested in what you're doing, particularly with respect to reducing environmental effects of operations. And a lot of the net zero and a lot of the sustainability pieces that you're going to be thinking about from an action standpoint are going to kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. Installing EV charging stations, increasing the adoption rate or enabling the adoption rate of EVs within the larger community, reducing localized air pollutants of criteria pollutants, for example. But the South Burlington, city of South Burlington also has a climate action plan that they're working on, and they're thinking about transportation, and they're thinking about all of the vehicle miles traveled. So it's a good opportunity within the ground transportation section and chapter that we're going to be looking at with you guys is how to kind of synergize those efforts. Make sure that you're working together to reduce those vehicle miles traveled to and from the airport, either through enhanced or public transit or car ride sharing, or the use and installation of EVs and EVSE charging infrastructure.
I have a question, and it doesn't sound as if, and I can certainly understand it, that included in the baseline is really an understanding of the fuel emissions from both the commercial and the military planes. And so I guess my question is, we certainly, the commission as well as South Burlington City Council and the Burlington City Council hear from lots of people who are very concerned about that and that it should be included. And from my perspective, I think if we can work on ground transportation and buildings, we'll and not wait till we have that information, we're better off kind of not having the perfect baseline. But I guess I'm curious how, if the airport's plan will include kind of partnering with the airlines and sort of encouraging them or finding out or doing whatever you can to have them embrace some climate action planning, as well as the military. The military is a little bit harder.
Helen, I got one point to make. Already in with the FAA, there's federal regulations, we're gonna require 10% of sustainable aviation fuel by 2030 and 100% sustainable aviation fuel by 2050, okay? So
Okay, that's
that
good.
takes that, all right, so, I mean, that's already in play. And I won't get into it right now, but when you look at airplane fuel in comparison to other things that you might not think are that big a deal.
Well, no, I think that's important, Larry.
Yeah.
So the EPA released their what they call a US greenhouse gas emissions plan just this past April. And of that plan, 27% of greenhouse gas emissions is coming from the transportation sector.
Mhm.
But as you dive into that 27%, only about 8% is coming from aircraft, which is about a 2 to 3% greenhouse gas emission when you look at the whole big picture. And that doesn't mean that that still means there's so much work to do, and we have to be a part of that solution. And how we as an airport can be part of that solution is, like Donnie said, through some of our inventory, our buildings, our concessionaires, our policies that we create, including, like you said, Helen, with our airline partners. They're so far ahead of where we are on this overall. They have, just like the FAA has, they have committed and purchased and are actually flying aircraft with sustainable aviation fuel. In fact, just the other day, we had a Boeing 737 that flew into this airport using that fueling system. And that's what's going to cut those greenhouse gas emissions and hit those thresholds that the FAA and the airlines have by 2030, which is only 8 years away, and then 2050, which is 28 years away. So it's critical that we have to join. We can't do this alone. We have to join.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think
So will we get a baseline of that information or reporting? I mean, that satisfies me that they're working on and making progress and have really good goals. But I just think the public, in light of total transparency, will the public ever learn that out of Burlington International Airport, there's X, amount of pounds of CO2 and they're going to reduce it by X? I'm just curious. It's not our power to report that. I just hope that maybe in conversations we can encourage them to educate the public about that.
So Helen, we're working with Nick and his team on gathering data on aircraft. So we're intending to include aircraft as part of the inventory. We'll see what the data shows and what we can provide. At the very least, I think there's going to be the amount of fuel that's being consumed at the airport by whether it's Jet A or avgas. We should have that information, so we may be able to leverage that and give orders of magnitude estimates based on what industry best practices are. So yes, it'll be included in the baseline to some extent, and hopefully within the full inventory itself. On the second point, one of the issues with SAF or sustainable aviation fuel is currently the supply. So it is, a lot of it's been pilot programs and pilot efforts. At a commercial scale, it's not as where it needs to be. And I guess there was a little bit of question as to how it's going to get to scale. It's much further along on the West Coast than it is on the East Coast. But that's an opportunity for partnership at the airport. Airport partnering with the airlines and partnering with other airports within the region to develop and advance and advocate for policies that advance it, or infrastructure or supply. So that's something that we could explore as part of that, as part of the management plan.
Thank you.
So, I'll add to that too, Donnie, real quick about sustainable aviation fuel. Heritage has been doing great research and progress on what we can right now, right? The supply, how it gets, there's so many different factors, very complicated factors to this. I think one of the important pieces as part of sustainable aviation fuel is it's still a commodity. there's still a cost to it, and we need to understand both at a local level and of course much bigger than Burlington at a national at a national and international level. Well, how is the cost of SAF or sustainable aviation fuel going to be compared to the cost of jet fuel? And how do the airlines, how are they encouraged to continue to use it? And those partnerships and collaboration, airport collaboration, airline collaboration needs to occur now. We're talking about this now, and I think that's one of the most encouraging things I got specifically out of the conference. Is there was 200 people at the conference that these were policymakers. These were representatives of Southwest Airlines and of so many other airports like Los Angeles and Dallas and Chicago, and these are the big airlines that have this capability, airports that have this capability now, and we need to fit into that working group of encouraging that growth. And it's not all about this new fueling system. It's about operational changes. It's about increased efficiencies in the airspace, and it's about new fleet technology as well, specifically related to aircraft. So there's lots of things that we can help with, partner with, and encourage and grow, and maybe even talk about as our contractual negotiations with the airlines. But there's also so many things we can do right here at the local level right now, like building new infrastructure, including working with demonstration units or like the Orb wind turbine or new solar panels, or exploring geothermal for our terminal building. And that's what I'm really encouraged to do concurrently while Donnie and his team move forward to make sure that we're headed down the right path right now.
And I totally support that and understand that that's really what we need to focus on and can focus on. I just wanted to understand that other reality. And I think the cost factor is certainly an important one. And just in a sense, kind of to give some of the critics perhaps some more information that might be helpful.
And at the same time, as I keep emphasizing, they're really, we have to be part of the solution today. I agree with some of that conversation. We're controlling and we're managing and directing a large, maybe the largest asset in the state of Vermont, in the region, and we need to be part of that solution for sure. And I'm super encouraged by it, but I also see the challenges with it, and there are challenges, whether we're talking about cost or funding costs and of course time. But we certainly have to work on it now. And working with even South Burlington and you and your team, and Jesse Baker's team is really, really encouraging for us too, to make sure that we're aligning our climate action goals with our neighbors, and being your neighbor and being the Burlington neighbor and Winooski's neighbor, and making sure that we're all headed down the right path.
I believe, Helen, also there has to be a lot of education, because everybody's looking at the burning of fuel, right? These big jets. When you think about some of the other things that you touch in everyday life that seem minute compared to that, they're a lot more significant than the jets. So I think there's a lot of examples of how relative this is. Not to downplay it, everybody should be doing their part, but there are comparisons that'll blow your mind on things that you wouldn't even think of that are a lot more potent than jet engines.
Right. Just a quick thought, just so everybody knows, it's for the sustainable aviation fuels, our buddies up north in Montreal there at ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, track these globally. And it's a thought to just put some of the links on our website, because I think that people don't realize how much work is being done in just the conversation of sustainable aviation fuels, which they label SAF. There's a tracking tool that tells exactly how many airports are using it, how many airplanes are in the air at any given amount of time using sustainable fuels, which airlines are using them. So the data is being collected globally, and then it has like latest news. JetBlue announces partnership with sustainable fuel. So there's a ton of stuff out there. It just doesn't really trickle into the news as every day, but it would be an easy link for those, trying to answer that exact question, because it's not well known.
Great.
Well, that's great information. Thank you. I'd encourage us to put that link.
I'll send it.
I think that wraps it up for us, right, Donnie? And of course,
Commissioners, any questions for Donnie?
No, nice job.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Donnie.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, that wraps up item 6. Item 7 is composed of 2 action items today. So the first is transfer utility easement. I'd like to entertain a motion to recommend to the Board of Finance and City Council the approval of a utility easement with GMP in the valley.
So moved.
All right, that's moved by Helen, second by Greg. Discussion, Shelby.
So this easement is one of 3 that's being sought. This is specifically for our property here at the airport to allow Green Mountain Power to provide additional electrical needs that are underground to get to Da Vinci Drive, which is where the beta facility will be manufactured. So this is to allow them to have the adequate needs that they have for that facility.
Commissioners, any questions for Shelby? Hearing none, all those in favor of recommending approval, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Item 701 carries. Next up is item 7.02. I'd like to entertain a motion to recommend to the Board of Finance and City Council the approval of purchase of liquid deicer of a liquid deicer unit for the runway usage. Do you hear a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Moved by Greg, seconded by Helen. Discussion?
Sure, that'll be by me.
Okay.
So we've had, last year we had the maintenance team made a kind of a makeshift unit that provide us the ability to experiment with liquid de-ice, which provides a synergistic effect in conjunction with the sodium formate, which is a solid de-ice that actually increases the effectiveness of the solid de-ice. And instead of waiting an hour sometimes for the solid de-ice to actually start to work, the liquid de-ice rapidly activates the solid. And so based on that, we experimented last year, but this year want to get a tow behind unit that will allow us to accurately monitor the application rates, because in last year with the unit that we had, it was only basically on or off. So this will actually allow us to accurately put down the chemical to the application rate that's needed, that's recommended by manufacturer. So yeah, it's $68,000 for the unit, and it'll be here, I believe, if it passes in the next few weeks. So
I would just add that this is, let's call it phase 2 of really getting into a liquid de-icing system for us. Phase 1 was last year with the ingenious way that our crew was able to add this to an existing truck. This is phase 2 with a small trailer, 1,000 gallon. Phase 3 is to get the proper storage right here on site. Right now, we're only purchase these in 275 gallon totes, which then eventually go to this new trailer system. And that's gonna help us alleviate and lower some of our costs purchasing in larger quantities versus small totes. So super, super critical. I think it saved us more than a handful of times last
Yes.
year,
Yeah.
and I'm sure it will this year as well.
Commissioners, any discussion on this thing?
It would seem as if there's a lot of advantages to this, and certainly the previous easement also, and I'm just sort of curious because of what we just talked about with sustainability. It would seem as if the trucks aren't running as long. It would seem as if Green Mountain Power is providing some electricity, but to a company that really tries to promote, a positive use of those things. And I would just encourage the staff to maybe make a laundry list of some of these things. These are just minor things, but these are all examples of things that are moving in the right direction.
Any other comments by commissioners?
You know, I just wonder, relative to the last comment, if it might be useful if you can, on different items like that, if there's also included just kind of a environmental impact or a climate change impact statement that is related to this use of dollars, not only savings, but, you know, in terms of just its impact on the environment and climate. It might be just a cool thing to have.
I love that. I mean, I think that's exactly where we need to start thinking, right? As I stated, as Greg stated, as you said, Ellen, and hopefully we're all thinking it. Everything that we do should have that element. Every decision we make internally on a day-to-day basis, and and adding it to this to keep that inventory or that list going, I think would be incredible. I really love that. Team, we're gonna do it.
Well, that would be great, and I think the Burlington City Council and public would really like to see that, and maybe can be the pro forma for all of city government.
Love it.
Great. Any other comments by commissioners? Hearing none, all those in favor of approval, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item 7.02 carries. We move on now to item 8, which is the construction update from Larry.
All right, I'll be quick. First of all, when you read through the report, you saw a lot of projects that are finished or being closed out. Marie's putting a lot of effort into closing those out because we don't receive 10% of the final payment until these projects are closed. So we retrieve that money. It makes Marie real happy, especially with a real big one we got hanging out there right now that we're anxious to call the FAA and bug them a little bit more again. Anyway, however, to follow up on that, the report is what the report says, but also the big thing is a couple weeks ago, we had our annual planning and CIP meeting with the FAA, okay? And that's where we look at, especially this upcoming fiscal year and the next 4 on what our spending will be and what we'll be looking to get. And it's all listed in those projects in that list. But there's some good things that came out of that meeting. We're very positive. We talked about, Nick's talked about a large carrier, a cargo carrier that wants to come in here with a bigger plane, and we need more cargo apron space. The FAA is going to allow us to apply for a design-only grant to get that process going, which is big because in the past, they would never allow that because they don't want to risk their money. They want us to risk our money in case it really doesn't happen. But that's the effort, and the team here has put a lot of effort into making sure the FAA gets what they need, and that's what we get out of that is they trust that we're going to move things forward. So that was huge. It'll only be about a $280,000 grant, but that'll design that apron, and then within 2 years we will build that apron. The second thing is, which will, when we're doing a rehabilitation of taxiway Alpha because it's not in good shape. And when we got into that process, We had to remove some of it from last year's grant that we received that it's already in process and approved. So we are putting back in that alternate that we did because we knew the money was tight last year. And we're going to get all of Alpha done and part of Charlie done as part of this whole entire project. That money will come as a grant this year, which is big. The south apron, the one that goes down into the quarry near the new beta facility, we have applied for, we have already prepared the application. It's been submitted and we're going back and forth with them right now. And that was money that was secured by Senator Leahy. And it's a $6.1 million project. The grant will be about $5 million. We have to come up with 10%, but also we can only build up to a certain distance to within a structure like beta or something like that. So they have to take responsibility for part of that cost to build the rest of it to come out of their building. So that was another good thing that'll be coming. So the other big thing was we were wondering, we know we need to do something about our main apron or main runway 1533, which is the busiest in commercial aircraft and all that needs rehabilitation. So we have had on the books for years the rehabilitation or mill and overlay of that project, that runway. We did affirm that they have programmed discretionary money for us to be able to do that in 2024. So we will be moving forward. In this case, we're not going to get the engineering up front. We're going to have to do the engineering, but by next year, we have to prepare for a very large project, which will all have to be done at night because we cannot shut down the runway in a 5-hour period. We have to do that entire project. So that was good news. It's programmed. The other news is because we're not spending all of our entitlement this year, we're putting some of that towards that next year to help secure we get everything we need to do the mill and overlay of runway 1533. And part of, and to move that forward to this year though, is we're going to do an updated pavement management plan that looks at the condition of all our pavements and also the strength and all that type of stuff. So we will apply for a grant. It's only $110,000. We'll get that done. We'll help support what we need to do with regard to runway 1533. The other, the bill funds that grants we have applied for is the North Terminal renovation, which Nick, I think we'll probably get into a little bit more later, is with regard to TSA being moved out of the north. We're going to redo all that area. We have a contractor lined up, ready to go. We're waiting on a grant, but we can actually start without the grant because of the bill money, you can do that. So we have applied for the grant. We have submitted the grant. We're waiting for that. That'll come this year. Another, this is huge. This next one is huge. With bill money, again, the FAA is going to support a design-only grant for our new SRE. Well, can't really say maintenance building, but mostly SRE storage building that we'll also do maintenance in. They're going to fund an upfront design project for that, which is huge. It's like $1.6 million. Okay, so that tells you the magnitude of what this project will be. And then over the next several years, as that we'll use that bill money to build that project, which is much, much needed. Let me see what else we got going here. Yeah. Then there's the big picture things, which I won't get into now. Like we did revise our application for the competitive money for the bill portion for the terminal projects with regard to the south for design of the south concourse, the new one, and replacing the old one. Okay. Last year we put in $35 million. And realistically, looking at what money's available in that fund and all that, they're not just going to give us that much money. So we said, let's ask for the design that puts us on track for having on the shelf to move forward over the next several years. So we have put in the paperwork and to compete for those dollars.
That's really important too. Yeah. Like Larry said, the competition part of it is really getting another $35 million from the FAA. Is going to be hard. We're talking about competing with all airports of the United States. Very, very difficult. So at least if we get this design work started, over the next couple of years if we're able to secure this grant competitively. We're one step ahead of the game, not just on applying for another grant, but there's a possibility of this really coming to the time frame where we are debt-free on our existing bonds, and we're able to secure potentially a new bond in the future to start this project, and at least have the FAA fund the design work. That's a huge criteria for getting design-only grants is if the FAA is not gonna fund the construction, how are you gonna build it? What's the risk of the FAA giving you this money if you're just gonna sit on a grant for a decade? So that's really, really important to really thoughtful and great idea by Larry to scale back a little bit, but still be ready for the next step.
And shelf ready is really nice when money becomes available that somebody else doesn't use and they say, hey, Burlington, and we're ready, So, and I'll make the rest of this really quick. So the other thing, I think, Nick's report that Senator Leahy put in money in a congressionally directed spending bill for the North Concourse, that is on our CIP to move forward. We have signed a contract as you've been reviewed by to start the preliminary design of that. We're doing borings and seismic and structural and all that right now to get ready to decide how to move that forward as we watch that legislation move forward and make the decision to really move forward. And then the last thing is, which is really a very most important thing, is the noise mitigation program. Our typical amount is about 5 million a year. And Nick's Nick's going to report on where we are with respect to the drawing and everything later on where we are with the 16 homes that we are signed a contract for to get done, the 54 that we're moving forward with design. And then obviously upon design of that, there'll be an application to do those 54 homes in May. So that's all I have. My report, like I said, there's plenty on the table to do. So if anybody have any questions?
I'm gonna put one more plug in for you, Larry. He just talked a lot about the future. His report talks a lot about what we're closing up, but we're really working on over 150 million plus of capital projects right now. I would say that the highest in the history of the airport. There's a lot going on, a lot of steps, a lot of thresholds that we need to meet. Larry, Shelby, Dave, Marie, we're all part of it, but Larry's really managing it, a lot of that day-to-day operation. So much work, but so critical, whether we're talking about how we're going to build these future projects on these pictures back here from a sustainability perspective, but also from a time perspective. This is the core team right here. This is the leadership team of a tens of millions of dollar capital program.
And the opportunity is here to try to move that forward now. So.
Excellent, thank you, Larry. Did you have?
Just a quick question, I guess for the entire team, but again, since my mind is on this sort of sustainability, and you mentioned how competitive some of these contracts can be, I'm just wondering if we demonstrate some of the sustainability, if that sort of gives us a little bit of level up on some of the competition and such. And if so, we can make ourselves a role model for other airports. I mean, what we can do can be done by other people.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and actually part of the legislation. So when Secretary Buttigieg announced some of these big bills, and of course the president announced these big bills, a big motivation was, what are the sustainable projects? What can you fund from a standalone project like solar fields, etc., to phase terminal projects, especially for small hub airports, and how can they incorporate some of these next generation systems, HVAC, to roof-mounted solar and things like that. It's also a tricky scenario to get the FAA to check off on, because as you add more of this to it, the cost of the project, the cost of going green sometimes does go up right now. There's a premium to that, so we need to balance that, making sure that if the FAA is not funding all of that, we still need to make sure we go as far as we possibly can. And there might be some local funding associated with that. Of course, I'm hoping not, we're hoping the FAA funds most of it, but it does give us that slight competitive edge when they start comparing us to somewhere in the Midwest on the same side.
And one last thing that I forgot, it's already done before, the group is the improvements to the lighting and the parking garage. The contract's on my desk, ready to be signed by Nick for a $2.5 million upgrade to our all new lighting in the parking garage. So that's really close to moving forward. Obviously, a lot of help from Shelby and Marie and everybody to get that going, and coordination on what that's going to take to get done. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Leonard.
Thank you.
Larry, one question before you go.
Sure.
Sorry, it might be totally available and maybe I missed it, but people are asking if there's any movement in the change to runway 1 and 19. There, I think at one point there was on the table possibly shortening it or taking out kind of the hump in the middle where the intersection with 1 and 5 and 3-3. Is there any change on the goals for that at this time?
That is on our CIP, and if you give me a second, or Nick, maybe you know off the top of your head what year we're shooting for that.
It was 26 or 25.
Hold on.
It was 2 years after the 1.5 project.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, there it is. The shortening is in 20. Right now, it's well, from a CIP standpoint, is 2026. Robin.
Okay, and is that like that's a done deal? It's happening. No further discussion.
We're right now, that's what's approved and recommended, and not only by the FAA, but by myself and the airport staff. And that's through an extensive amount of safety research, studying with the FAA.
Big thing is funding, because we don't get funding if we don't.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah, so-
and it's more than
Yeah.
just right. We don't get funding. We've already went through so many extensive shifts and policy changes to that particular runway, including without getting into the specifics too much, or the technicalities, I should say, too much, including right-sizing the classification of that runway so that, like to Larry's point, we do get funding, that
Right.
we can call it our crosswind runway, but we have to look at this, of course, the safety factors associated with that particular area. And it's not just the runway, there's multiple nodes and multiple issues with that particular intersection. But I wouldn't say it's a done deal. We're 4+ years away from, probably 2 to 3 years away from starting conversations of the design work. And in the meantime, we're going to be talking about really publishing it and understanding and sharing it with the general aviation community, especially because that's, of course, who it should impact.
The biggest impact. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to item 9, which is the financial update for Marie.
Thank you. So this month you have before you a finance package where we're looking at the revenues and the expenses for the month of September. And looking at the metrics for the revenues through September, as well as looking at the cash position and what is owed to us by the FAA under our grant program. That is through the end of October. The one thing that not a whole lot of changes to the grants from what I have reported in the past month. I did update the grant anticipation note. We will be going ahead and renewing. This is something we do annually. And so we must renew it annually if we wish to continue with the grant anticipation note. It's called, we nickname it GAN, our GAN. We currently owe $2.5 million on the GAN. We borrow this amount. This project is for one specific AIP, a large one, and that the closeout was submitted to the FAA in August, and we are waiting for them to finish their review and receive our money on that. But we'll be going ahead. We'll be going ahead and renewing the renewal of the GAN, the clerk treasurer's office downtown, it really gets sort of run by them. And they negotiate with the bank and they, work on that. We tell them how much they want to do. They're going to be putting together a resolution that is going to go to the Board of Finance and City Council for approval. I think that's going to go either the end of this month or the 12th of December. And at least then we'll have the authorization to go ahead and do that. But that literally is just, that just came up actually this week. So I don't have it as a separate item in here, but I did want to bring that to your attention. The other thing that I wanted to point out is the interest rate on the GAN had been pretty low for a long time. It follows the LIBOR rate, but as interest rates have done in all of the markets, we are seeing that go up, unfortunately. So I wanted to let you know how much interest we had paid so far since June on that one AIP, which is $32,000, which is getting to be a lot of money. A lot of that's due just to the interest rate variability and the increases of that. The good news is that the interest that we pay under the GAN is reimbursable we can put that as part of our next application when we do a PFC application, and we can use PFC dollars to reimburse ourselves for the interest cost. So that's the benefit of using the GAN. And we try to turn things around as quickly as we can, but sometimes it's out of our control a little bit. We're waiting on the FAA. Our revenues, I'm really pleased to report that our revenues continue to be very strong. I think the garage revenue, and even though the revenues I'm reporting here are through the end of September, when I look at, we have the full numbers for parking garage revenues. I don't have them for L revenues for October, but for parking garage revenues, we're at 101% of our revenues compared to pre-COVID 2019. So just to give you an idea, and I think it's really interesting when we're looking at revenues to look at this separate sheet that looks at the sort of our biggest revenues and see how we're doing. And you can see, if you looked at that the recovery is continuing to climb upwards and continuing to do really well. Particularly the car rental concessions are 113%. The CFCs are 110%. The CFCs are going to start to flatten out because when we negotiated with the car rental companies a year ago and signed a contract, they increased the CFC charge from $4 to $6. So a lot of this is even depending on the volume, we're getting $6 for every transaction, and that's going to start to phase out. That was for a year. So we have two family brands that initiated that first, and then we have one that initiated it in the early spring. So we're gonna have a little bit of, you're gonna see those revenues are gonna flatten out a little bit more. But these are great. These are really reassuring that the airport has done well in the revenue recoveries. As far as our expenses go, they were $3.4 million through September. So for the first 3 months, this is a little bit higher than last year. A lot of that is actually due to the fact that we opened the quick turnaround facility for our car rental companies, which is on this side of the airport, on this north side of the airport. And we're purchasing fuel. Now, all the fuel that we purchase, everything that the car rentals use, we calculate that. We have a very sophisticated system that tracks which car rental company is using and by the gallon at the time. And we bill them at the end of each month. We bill them for their use and they pay us. So it looks higher, but the expenses, but that's the primary difference. And all of that detail is in there. So if you have any questions, you should always feel free to ask. Yes.
Quick question on that again, coming back to the sustainability issue, because it's just nice to connect those things whenever possible. Does the rental companies, do they have electric charging stations?
I'm going to let Shelby. She's got some exciting news. So go ahead, Shelby.
Yeah, they began installing yesterday or Monday?
Monday, yep.
Monday, 8 Tesla chargers as a initiative of Hertz. They have a fleet of 100,000 Teslas that are being delivered in the spring. So they're going around to all these airports. They did all the level 1 2, and we're a level 3 tier airport, small, large, medium, small, and they are getting to us for the full rollout. So they are Tesla, but they have a headpiece that will also accommodate Volkswagen.
Contract requirements.
Oh, yes. We have contract requirements as well, that by the end of the contract, they have to have at least 10% of their fleet at minimum. And that contract ran 5 years, it started in 22, yeah. So, you know, we're already in 23, and I think we're making some good improvements. Following suit will be Enterprise. I'm not sure who they're partnering with. And then Avis Budget has not implemented a plan of this kind yet, but usually they all kind of fall in domino. But yes, we're really excited, and we have spaces that were earmarked for this at the QTA. So they're not spaces that were assigned to anyone, because we were kind of hoping to do like a universal charging area. For this initial piece, this is being sub-metered to Hertz themselves, and they'll be paying the bill directly, which was kind of a savvy part of their program that they initiated.
Great. And that could be a part of this laundry list of examples, again, that sort of push us more in the direction of sustainability.
When we write these memos, I'm just gonna call you. Then Craig, what do you think? It's gonna be helpful.
I never answer my phone.
Our cash position as at the end of October, we continue to have sufficient and strong cash revenue. So $8.1 million we had in our checking account. We did not owe the city any money.
The highest in how many years?
Since I've been tracking it. Yeah. So we're positioned very strongly right now, which is good, because we have, Larry mentioned that $2.5 million light switch over. We're going to have some things that are coming up, and that's an operating expense as part of our operating budget. So, you know, we'll see some of that going on, but we're positioned well. We're planning ahead to be able to adequately, smoothly cover the expenses that we know that are coming up. And we were owed $5.2 million from the FAA at the end of October. Again, $2.5 million of that is just one AIP. So we turn things around the best that we can, but there's always a little bit of a lag.
We have responded on that one. We're just waiting, and we just want to give them a little more time before we vote, because, you know.
There are partners.
There are partners. There are partners.
Really good.
Really good practice.
The last thing that I will just let you know is I was putting together, we're going to be bringing as the year goes on, we have to make adjustments to our budget. Things will come up, and I realize I don't have enough. We have to budget at the very detailed account level. So we have cost center, and then within cost center, we have account. So sometimes I've got plenty of money budgeted for airport, but sometimes it's just not the right place as we go along and things come up. So putting together a budget amendment that will try to bring down and yeah, so it's under $100,000, but just to sort of step and cover where we've seen some expenses be a little maybe different than we thought they were going to be, but certainly not out of the realm or worrisome or anything. And that is this month's report, but I'm happy to take any and all questions.
Commissioners, any questions or comments for Rory?
One, just related to that gentle reminder that Larry sort of spoke of. There is talk that on the federal level that they might not be able to negotiate payment in order to keep the government operating. That might be an incentive to speak to them. If it sounds like they're not going to be able to reach that agreement, you might want to contact them sooner rather than later, because part of that agreement may be that they just don't send out any more money.
They're obligated. These grants that we have been earmarked, and we'll say budgeted in the FAA's budget in prior years. Okay, so if we have a grant that we got in 2022, that grant is good. We're not at any risk for them not to pay on that particular grant. any going forward, they have to rely on the monies the entire FAA gets. That has to get budgeted and obligated to them. So it would be future monies that might be delayed and somehow, or, they might have to say, well, we're not getting everything we planned on or whatever. That can happen, but not on anything we have existing. Any existing grant is we are safe with that. There's no risk to us on the funding source.
Checks in the mail.
Checks in the mail. Yeah. Great question.
Somebody there to send it. The postal people are working. I understand they're not funding, they're not working.
Yeah.
Right, that's the biggest impact with any of these continuing resolutions or any of these other things is the staff working with our partners, one-on-one. They might not be able to click the button to send the ACH or whatever the case may be, but the funds are.
We are anxiously waiting, we are anxious to call, but we just gotta be careful.
They're a relatively small staff too, when they're at our local airport district office down in Burlington, Massachusetts.
All right, commissioners, any other questions for Marie? Thank you, Marie.
Thank you.
Move on now to item 10, noise monitoring data. Stand in for Hannah. Yes.
I could stand in for Hannah. So she put together multiple graphs as she typically does, both on type of comment that we receive based on aircraft type, also based on geographic location, which town the comment is coming from. The new one in there is a breakdown of unique commenters. You've seen something similar in the past. These are generally individual commenters. So a single household that's making this, I call it household because of but a single household making these comments. The exception to that is the dark blue and the dark green on the top left corner there. So 8% is 8% of our comments of the 498 comments since June of last year are coming from individuals, 8% of those numbers, whereas 70%, the 46, 12, and the 12, the gray, orange, and the light blue, 70% is coming from 3 individuals. And that's of that 500 comments. Again, this, to many of the points made in the past, this isn't all comments. We don't receive every single comment associated with the F-35. The FAA, in fact, has their own commenting website that they are trying to promote more and more. The Air National Guard accepts comments directly to them. These are strictly the comments that we are receiving on our new vector system, our online portal. We are working on other data solutions for that as well. In fact, we're working with some of our department leaders within the city of Burlington on a new GIS system. I have no idea what GIS stands for, but
Geographical information system?
Yeah, something like
GIS, but it encompasses so much more, but specifically we've talked about maps and they're going to help us try to figure out how to group some of these comments together or report some of these statistics coming from our noise monitor and from the comments. Could roll right into the next.
Yep.
So this is an updated map associated with our noise insulation program. We do need to change the heading of this total agenda item. I just saw this. Okay. But the noise insulation program led by Larry. Again, as you look at this graphic right here, we're attached to board docs. The purple and the light the greenish color, the large green parcel is all airport-owned properties or vacant properties that have previously been purchased through the FAA's noise acquisition program. The red and the kind of highlighted green there is new houses or parcels that are being either designed or finished design, bidded out, and are going to be starting construction in the spring of new insulation. We are exploring right now 121. I wish Eric was here to relay this, but 121 houses right now are on the list. That does include some of these parcels that are on this map. And of those 121, we are now embarking on new towns and offering this to Winooski. There are a handful of houses in Winooski. Some have declined the program, some are participating, as well as Williston, and of course, the majority right now are within South Burlington that are going through. We had a couple of nice homeowner meetings recently in the last month or so, going through the steps and the logistics of what's going to be offered, and yeah, very exciting to see 121 as we go to the next round of grants. So we're on our progressive path to continuing our noise insulation project. This is a huge, I think, piece to the sustainability program, a positive spin to a complicated and challenging project. And that is, of course, massive energy efficiencies, not just noise insulation, but energy efficiencies that are kind of come from this program. Get it?
Got it.
Any questions for Nick on his noise presentation?
Just not a question, but just sort of a follow-up. The last meeting, I think I just brought up the story of driving on the highway. It was a cloudy day, and all of a sudden, I thought a car or a huge truck was running into me. I won't sort of go through this story again, but mentioned the possibility of maybe contacting the Department of Transportation, and maybe they can coordinate something with the National Guard to just alert people that be on the ready for planes. Yeah,
Larry and I have talked about that, and we're going to be working with the Highway Department as well as South Burlington, because of the Lime Kiln Road there is their jurisdiction to at least post some signs there. I was actually touring Bradley Airport a couple of weeks ago, and they have very similar signage there, which makes a lot of sense.
Just a quick question, and was it in our noise monitoring plan? I know we're doing residences. Have any of has there been any public use spaces like Winooski schools or anything else that have reached out or are targeted as something that would obviously benefit? Being at a campus that is literally under the flight path, I can tell you that we have to all stop classes every time they fly over, literally stop, pause, wait, and continue. So I'm sure others are impacted even more than me.
Yeah, so most recently, the Chamberlain Elementary School went through a substantial renovation project with new heating units, air conditioning units, I should say, and windows to make sure that the interior noise levels were reduced, because they were within the 65 DNL and classified by the FAA. To be eligible for these noise programs. I don't recall off the top of my head any other public use space or schools that are eligible, which would mean that they would need to be within the 65 DNL contour line. But we do have a list of all of those non-compatible areas, again, as defined by the FAA. We are working our way closest outwards. Chamberlain was higher level and more at the request of many folks to be initiated as part of our first insulation project. But if they are within the 65, whether it's this map or our future map, because remember, we are undergoing an update to this map right now. They would be reached out to be included in the projects if eligible, and it's particular too. It's very different than a residential program. For example, the Chamberlain School, not every room in that building was eligible, only very specific rooms.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll just add, education facilities and usually places of worship, hospitals, those types of facilities would be eligible.
All right. Thank you, Nick. So that concludes item 10. We'll move on to item 11, though. So as we discussed earlier, there is no item 11, so Helen will come back to you in item 13 for that. So we move on to item 12, which is the director's report.
Perfect. I know we're going on a long meeting here, so I'll try to keep it, I will keep it very brief. Quick staff update. Dave sent out an email to the whole airport team, but one of his senior staff, Stacy Levely, was recently down in Washington, D.C. going through what's called the Loretta Scott accreditation program, and she went through a very, very extensive and intense training process to receive her certified member accreditation through the American Association of Airport Executives, which is amazing. I have my CM, and Dave actually has the accreditation, which is next, which is far greater, including a master's degree and very, very intense interview process. But super proud of Stacy and happy to report that she received her certified member accreditation. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about snow, especially on today. Dave's been up a long time today with his team. Our team came in early to start our first snow event. We saw Heritage and their team out using some of the old BTV equipment, which, as you remember, we recently sold to Heritage. We're making really good use of it. So I just want to say thank you to publicly to our entire team, because it's November 16th and it's the start of the snow season, unfortunately, but really proud of the work they did already. Larry already mentioned a bunch of items associated with the terminal integration project completed in the actual building. We have some final pieces that are happening downstairs. It still looks really beautiful. New carpet is in downstairs in the existing portion of the building. We have about a week left and we will be 100% complete from the project. It'll go into next week a little bit more. We're hoping by the end of Friday, but a little bit longer. Looks fantastic, really great flow. Now we're able to go to the next project, which is the $2 million North renovation project. Not on these pictures right here, but this is another bill-funded project that we're going to change some of the layout of our North concourse area, open up the space to the capacity that we really need up on the north side. So that's going to happen in about 2 weeks. The first week of December, we're going to start taking that up. Another intrusive project because it is inside of the existing building. So we're going to have areas shut down and detours associated with traffic flow. But the end result is going to be really, really spectacular. And then the final piece is this graph right here. I just wanted to share because it was extremely exciting. I was able to share it with Tim a week ago. We are the busiest airport in New England, outside of Boston. Little caveat. And that, I'm glad actually Matt is here because that's a huge caveat to the amount of work that Heritage does every day, not just on our terminal ramp, the commercial operations, But the general aviation operation, which really contributes to this this orange number on the right-hand side of this particular chart, and our air traffic operations. I think I've reported in the past that air traffic recently received a grade increase on their salary scale. And that's because they are busy. We are very complex at this airfield. Again, we are busier than any I'm gonna say northeast airport. And that includes Bradley, Manchester, Providence, Portland, Maine, Bangor, and Albany. We have more operations. Of course, that's not passenger numbers, but that's the total number of operations, landings, takeoffs, and traffic in our airfield right here. That's super exciting. As we went further along in this analysis, air traffic and the FAA also helped us gather additional data, which I'll probably report on in the future. But there's other larger, over 1 million population metro areas that we are now busier, like Milwaukee. And like I said, Providence and some of these other airports right here. 1 million population metro areas, and our airport is seeing a massive increase to that number of operations. Not general, like I said, and not a lot of it is contributed to commercial air traffic, or commercial traffic is actually consolidating into larger, more efficient aircraft or mainline aircraft. In fact, Larry and I were on a mainline aircraft coming home last night. But this is a huge contribution to all of our general aviation partners. Beta Technologies is Vermont Flight Academy, huge contributor to this massive increase over the last year and a half. Super exciting, so I couldn't not share that with you all. That does it for me for the report.
On that particular point, I didn't notice it the first time you shared it, but we're also the only airport in this table that is busier in 2022 than 2019.
During the, from an increase of pre-pandemic.
Right, so from pre-pandemic,
Yeah,
we're the only one that's busier.
yeah, that's great.
All right, commissioners, any questions for Nick? Observations?
I just have one. I think this is the right time. I had the pleasure of flying through BTV last week, so I got to experience the new TSA portion, and it was great. And every person who works there with whom I spoke, I asked them, how do you like it? And there was a lot of smiles and a lot of positive things. So it was a very happy staff there, and it was just really satisfying to see. So kudos.
Thank you for sharing that, Helen.
And I'll echo the same thing. I flew out on the first of Halloween. I didn't know people would dress up on planes for Halloween. The answer is no.
Did you were the only one?
No. I would have said TSA agent. But similar experience to Helen. Like everyone seemed really happy. You know, one person was like, "Yeah, I'm still learning the machine," but overall, I think people were happy. And
I can tell you my experience, Larry, my experience through Chicago yesterday was not nearly as pleasant. I love Chicago, and I love having the partnership with United, of course, to go to Chicago. But the experience was very, very different with their checkpoint. Old machines, slow lines. You got to take out all of your electronics from the back. Here, I was able to throw my bag into a single bucket, not take out my toiletries or machines. I did not fly pre-check to kind of see what that experience is. Also, I'm not pre-check. Although I do encourage everybody to get pre-check. My Chubby is forcing me to go at the end of the month. Yeah, very vastly different in Chicago. Yeah. Good.
all right, thank you, Nick. So item 13 is follow-up item. So Helen, this was yours here. We had the presentation today from VHB. Does that address your outstanding follow-up item, or is there more you'd like to see on that? Helen, are you there?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you. What, would you say
Okay.
that again?
Sure,
Yes.
so we had as a follow-up item from many meetings ago, I don't remember exactly how many, that you wanted to hear an update on the airport sustainability plan, so we had a
Oh, no,
presentation.
what I heard today was great. And I think, and I like the idea of having a sustainability report on a lot of the action items. So the world and the public knows that we're really serious about it. So no, I'm fine. That was perfect.
Thank you. And then just for all commissioners, just as a reminder, because I don't know if I've ever really, this is really more for Greg and Robin. The concept of the follow-up item is, as we come to the end of the meeting, if there's anything that you feel airport staff needs to follow up on for a future meeting or outside of the meeting, we add that here so we don't sort of lose track of the various little things that need to be done. So commissioners as a whole, are there any items that we should add to follow-up items for next time around? Anything you're looking for airport staff to follow up on?
I'm a little worried that the next time I come to the park, that large tractor is gonna still be there, but I don't. You probably saw that.
The tractor?
Yeah, there's a lawnmower in a couple of lawnmowers in the airport commissioner parking.
It wasn't.
We will follow up on it.
That would be my team. Moving them out of the way to get the plows
First of all,
out.
it's not a problem because we don't have enough airport commissioners. So, that's the problem.
That's my tractor, actually. I'm driving that.
Robin Lecter's here. Oh, gosh. That's funny. We'll laugh about it tomorrow.
All right, so that concludes follow-up items. Item 14 is adjournment. And just before we adjourn, just want to reiterate, our next meeting will be December 7th at 4 p.m. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion.
Second?
All right, thank you. All those in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I don't think so. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey,
Good meeting.
can I make a comment before you all leave? And now that we're adjourned,